put some perspective to some of the issues that Illyria raised. The region in the Middle East is probably known for its abundance of oil. But I would like to tender before you here that a more defining, a better characteristic would be its shortages, its critical shortages of water. 5% of the world population reside in the Middle East, but it has less than 1%. And the total availability between 1970 and 2005 has been cut by a third. And there is now increasing concern that this scarcity of water is likely to escalate. The region is also characterized by the fact that 85% of the water is shared water, in the sense that no single country, with the exception of Lebanon, that has its own sources of water and does not depend on any external sources. The rest of the countries, they share this water, almost to a tune of 85%. Israel takes 60% of its water from outside sources. It's also true that the water reliability in the region is extremely critical. Defining water reliability to be the amount of water that's available 9 out of 10 years, that amount is less than 5%. This is absolutely the lowest in the world. The World Bank defines water poverty to be anything below 1,000 cubic meters per person per year. 15 countries of the 22 identified by the World Bank as water poor are in the Middle East. And actually, most of these countries don't even have 500 cubic meters per person per year. And if this physical scarcity of water is any serious one, is compounded by what we call economic scarcity, in the sense that the price of water is so cheap in the region and is determined totally outside its value and its scarcity value, or even what we call in economics boring term like marginal cost of production, what would cost you extra to lift a cubic meter of water to the ground, the water prices are so low. There is here a culture of waste. Technologically, Israel may have really drip irrigation and some bragging rights about certain technologies, but by God, the Water Commissioner in Israel has called water use in Israel the greatest culture of waste you could ever imagine, because Israel, that is known to have such a little amount of water, is basically exporting incredibly water-intensive products: flowers, cotton, cucumbers, watermelons, 90% of which is water. And here it is, a water-poor country, living on water that it extracts, if not steals from, a more depressed and dispossessed people, and is exporting it to Europe and other countries that are water-rich countries. There is also the situation here where 80% of this water in Israel is allocated to agriculture. Now it has come down a bit. They brag about 60%, but I am still suspicious, and maybe Illyria would know better than I do, about 70% of which is going to agriculture. Agriculture contributes less than 2.6% to the Israeli GDP. All right? And this amount of water that they're using, 870 million cubic meters of water. Palestinians under the military orders 92-156, the Palestinians are prevented from using, is basically and fundamentally used in agriculture and used to contribute such a little amount to the total gross domestic product of the Israelis. The Palestinians, on the other hand, who literally have less than a third of what the Israelis have on per capita basis. And if you really look at it in terms of the sectors that they use it, these numbers, asymmetries, are extremely more profound. And for example, 4% of the total agricultural land of Palestine is irrigated. 60% of the Israeli land is irrigated. All right? And this is for water that belongs naturally, legitimately to the people of Palestine. You also have the situation where the 2% that they're talking about of GDP to the Israelis, under different governance regime, when the West Bank was not governed and was not occupied by the Israelis, agriculture in Palestine represented 25% of gross domestic product of Palestine. and still employs over 37% of the total population. And Israel does not even employ 2% of the Israeli people. And in this respect, you could see the asymmetries, and you could appreciate more and more why these asymmetries in terms of the proportions that the Palestinians per capita, per person, compared to the Israelis. In per capita domestic use, such as household use, residential use, the Palestinians in 2006 had only 37 cubic meter of water per person. The Israelis had 95. In agriculture, the Palestinians had 43 cubic meters per person per year. The Israelis had 190. In industry, they had only 3.2 cubic meter per person per year. The Israelis had 7 times, 21 million. In total, 83 cubic meter per person per year for the Palestinians versus 310 cubic meter per person for the Israelis. And this is water that rightfully does not belong to them. And it is basically devoted and abused, so to speak, economically because of the cheap prices. I mean, Israelis are known that there is now a penalty if you use more water. But what so happens is that the price is so low that they pay the penalty and still below the, what we call the net return that the farmer gets on this water from extra production. There is no international agreement. There is no international law that is ruling and determining this unjust allocation of water. It seems to be basically and fundamentally a reflection of the asymmetrical and unbalanced allocation of power. This is the occupier basically denying the occupied the right for return. And if there is something that we can take from the first speaker, that water is ultimately, especially a small amount of it, a minimum amount of it, is now defined to be a human right. The Palestinians are denied a human right. They're lawful, they're legitimate, they're necessary, they're equitable share of water. And it's basically and fundamentally a reflection of a system of asymmetries, a system of discrimination that would allow major, fantastic, Olympic-sized pools to coexist with empty and totally dry wells or reservoirs in the West Bank. You could see some of these fields to be looming with incredible vegetation on the settlement sites, and you'll find them to be totally dry on the Palestinian side. The difference of about 4 times per Israeli water share to the Palestinian on the settlements is 10 to 12 times that difference. And that is really an exaggerated form under which the Palestinians have to contend and live with. And the question is, what were the consequences of this? Well, certainly under global warming, under climate change, call it by whatever name you want. Even George Bush has succumbed to some part of it. But the whole story is we are facing critical, escalating shortages of water. And in that respect, any waste of this water is a criminal offense in the sense that you're denying people the right to life. And in that respect, there must be here a situation in which we can rebalance this asymmetrical situation. But you say, what is behind all this? What's the geopolitical objective here? Well, if you deny people water for agriculture, and that's exactly what really happened on the West Bank, is you transform the peasantry into a proletariat. The peasants are now disconnected from their land, and they become cheap labor. And they have exploited this cheap labor in many different respects. You could see during the 70s and 80s and before the Intifada, a third of the total Palestinian labor was literally daily workers who would sit on corners where Israeli employers would come and choose people by probably looking at their teeth as if they're horses or animals of sorts, to see if they would really be taken to work. They will work during the day in Israeli factories and fields, and they will be shipped back a lot in their bantustans at night because they don't want them to be in their midst in the evenings. What this really happened is basically and fundamentally try to uproot the Palestinians from their land, trying to make the source of life and income independent of their land and the community. And in that respect, they become easy prey for any transfer that has always been a major design that the Zionists have been dreaming about. And in that respect, that water system became really a double barrel here weapon. On the one side, you basically maintain and sustain available water and for your own secure demand. At the same time, you deny it to others in the hope that this, not only in these small villages, but even in the West Bank, you would basically and fundamentally dissociate the citizens, the residents, from their own land, from their community, and their source of income becomes independent of their activities on their land, in their communities, but become literally dependent on working in Israel or probably immigrating and working in the Gulf. And in that respect, that transformation of the Palestinian peasantry into a proletariat, a daily proletariat, a shiftable, a transferable proletariat, has always been a cornerstone of the Israeli design, manifested by this apartheid regime that is basically and fundamentally trying to dispossess the Palestinians, not only of their land, but also of their water, also of their labor, and make them basically a transferable labor, very cheap. And in that respect, they were getting a fraction of the Israeli wage. And even when they got probably some higher wages compared to what they got in Palestine, it ultimately, this high cost, denied the Palestinian economy of any competitive or comparative advantage that could get from its relatively cheap labor. Because now they're basically more expensive, because life is more expensive, because they're exposed to an expensive shekel economy. And in this respect, look, they used to produce shoes and textiles at a fraction of what it costs in Jordan. Today, producing a shoe is 2.5 times more expensive in Palestine than in Jordan. And a textile shirt would cost 4 times. And the reason for it is that now they're forced to buy Turkish or other types of textile and cannot really get it from the cheapest Asian ones, whereas the Jordanians are able to get it. The Palestinians have not been able to. Palestinian agriculture has been extremely productive. Even now, despite all these measures, and in spite of all these harsh measures, Palestinians are very competitive in olive oil, in citrus fruit, in watermelon, and many, many other vegetables. And they have been able to outcompete the Israelis on this. But most of the times, because of roadblocks, most of the times because of denial of freedom of movement, they have not been able to access market. They can't access the Arab markets. They've been severed totally from their natural domain. There was an incredible, very lucrative market in the Gulf for these things, but their agriculture died on the ground, in lorries, on trucks, on the farms, because Palestinian farmers have no markets, have no access. They used to sell things to the Europeans, and then the Israelis would have to give their last permit, and even the European Union had to interfere and has to impose on Israelis some measures, usually a slap on the wrist, as is typical of the Europeans, and not much more. What we have here is a situation of an infraction, a major violation of the human rights of the Palestinians. It's forfeiting their potential, their ability to create a thriving economy. It's basically forfeiting not only the present generation, but many generations to come. Thank you.